I'm being what, Chairman? A woman? Young? Black? Which one of those things makes my facts less valid? The question hung in the air like a lightning bolt, a brutal, savage reckoning for a senator who thought himself untouchable. In that precise, earth-shattering moment, Senator Lindsey Graham realized he'd walked straight into a meticulously laid trap, a political ambush from which there was no escape. What happened next wasn't just a debate, it was a public implosion, a complete demolition that silenced the entire, packed Senate Judiciary Committee and left Graham looking utterly shattered, like he'd just been hit by a political tsunami of truth. Nobody, absolutely nobody, expected this seemingly routine hearing on election security to explode into one of the most viral, shocking, and unbelievable political moments of the entire year. Before we dive into how Jasmine Crockett, a fearless newcomer, completely destroyed one of the Senate's most experienced, arrogant, and condescending politicians, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. Trust me, what you're about to witness is the kind of political beatdown, a brutal, unhinged takedown, that gets talked about for decades. This is required viewing for anyone who truly wants to understand real, raw political power in action, and how it can be wielded with devastating effect. Don't miss a single second of this firestorm. On one side, a figure of the old guard, Senator Lindsey Graham, the 68-year-old South Carolina Republican and committee veteran. A political titan with nearly 3 decades entrenched in the power structures of Washington, Graham had meticulously built his reputation as a sharp-tongued operator, a master of political theater who could dish out punishment with a disarming smile. He was known for his quick wit, his uncanny ability to work across the aisle when it strategically suited his agenda, and his undeniable talent for turning any hearing into his personal stage. But beneath that veneer of charm and experience, Graham had also cultivated a notorious reputation for being profoundly condescending, especially towards women and people of color who dared to challenge his authority or his narrative. Over the years, countless damning videos had surfaced, exposing his pattern of interrupting female witnesses, making dismissive, arrogant comments, and shamelessly using his senatorial authority to shut down uncomfortable, inconvenient questions. His loyal supporters, blinded by partisan loyalty, saw him as a skilled, unyielding politician who never backed down from a fight, a true champion of their cause. His critics, however, saw him as an arrogant, out-of-touch relic, a living embodiment of everything wrong with Washington's antiquated, elitist old boys club. He genuinely, arrogantly believed that his vast experience and his deep institutional knowledge made him utterly untouchable in these kinds of high-stakes hearings. He had handled hundreds of these confrontations over his illustrious career, always confident in his unparalleled ability to control the narrative, dictate the tone, and relentlessly put witnesses on the defensive. He perfected a manipulative technique of using humor and condescension, a subtle form of psychological warfare, to make his opponents look foolish, emotional, or ill-prepared, all while appearing perfectly reasonable and composed to the unsuspecting viewers at home. He was a master manipulator, and he knew it. On the other side, a rising star, Representative Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old Democrat from Dallas, representing a completely different, refreshing kind of political power, raw, authentic, and unafraid. Born and raised in the challenging streets of St. Louis, she fought her way through college and law school, forging a formidable career as a public defender and a relentless civil rights attorney. She'd spent grueling years in hostile courtrooms, tirelessly defending the fundamental rights of people who couldn't defend themselves, facing down aggressive, intimidating judges and prosecutors who tried every dirty trick in the book to silence her, to break her spirit, to force her into submission. Crockett's path to Congress had been anything but conventional. She'd only been elected in 2022, making her one of the newest, freshest members of the House. But her sharp legal background, her razor-sharp intellect, and her fearless, uncompromising approach to confrontation had rapidly propelled her into the national spotlight, cementing her status as a rising star in the progressive movement. She'd gone viral multiple times for her incisive, piercing questioning of witnesses and her absolute refusal to be intimidated by senior, self-important politicians. What made Crockett particularly dangerous, what made her a true force of nature, was her meticulous, almost obsessive preparation. Unlike so many career politicians who lazily relied on their staff to brief them with bullet points, she did her own exhaustive research, memorized complex case law, and came to every single hearing armed to the teeth with irrefutable facts, precise figures, and ironclad legal precedents. She'd learned a brutal truth in the courtroom: the best defense against the bully, against arrogance, was to be overwhelmingly, undeniably better prepared than your opponent. The stakes of this hearing, a seemingly innocuous discussion on voting rights, couldn't have been higher. Republicans across the country had aggressively pushed through dozens of new, restrictive voting laws in the chaotic wake of the 2020 election, falsely claiming they were absolutely necessary to prevent widespread, non-existent fraud. Democrats, on the other hand, vehemently argue that these draconian laws were meticulously designed to suppress minority voting, a cynical attempt to drag the country back to the dark, oppressive days of Jim Crow. The outcome of this heated, ideological debate would inevitably influence upcoming Supreme Court cases and potentially disenfranchise millions of voters, fundamentally altering the fabric of American democracy. Graham's committee was actively considering federal legislation that would either dramatically strengthen or fatally weaken these controversial state voting laws. For Graham, this hearing was a calculated move, a strategic battle to maintain Republican control over election policy and to arrogantly prove that concerns about voter suppression were nothing more than overblown, hysterical Democratic talking points. His ultimate goal was to ruthlessly use his authority and vast experience to discredit Democratic witnesses, to make their arguments seem utterly unreasonable, even absurd. For Crockett, however, this was about something infinitely more profound, something deeply personal. She'd grown up listening to the heartbreaking stories from her beloved grandmother about being systematically denied the right to vote in rural Missouri, stories of humiliation and injustice. She'd witnessed firsthand how insidious legal technicalities and bureaucratic hurdles could be weaponized to deny people their most basic, fundamental rights. This wasn't just about abstract policy for her, it was about raw justice, inherent dignity, and the unfulfilled promise of American democracy. The political context made everything even more intensely charged, a powder keg waiting to ignite, with the pivotal 2024 election rapidly approaching. Both major parties were shamelessly using voting rights as a central, polarizing campaign issue. Republicans were feverishly energizing their base with baseless claims about election integrity, while Democrats were desperately mobilizing voters with dire warnings about widespread suppression. Every single exchange in this hearing, every word, every gesture, would be meticulously clipped, ruthlessly analyzed, and weaponized by both sides in the brutal arena of public opinion. The stage was set, the tension palpable, for a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing that should have been routine, but was about to transform into an unforgettable, brutal political battlefield. Graham, in his hubris, thought he was dealing with just another House representative, a naive newcomer who would be easily intimidated by his Senate authority and decades of political experience. He had no idea, not the slightest clue, that Crockett had been preparing for this exact, defining moment her entire career. She'd spent countless hours studying his tactics, watching endless replays of his previous hearings, meticulously analyzing his patterns of condescension and interruption, and preparing specifically, surgically, for his predictable style of attack. She knew, with chilling certainty, that he would try to interrupt her, dismiss her legitimate concerns, and use his authority to silence her. She was ready for all of it, every single dirty trick in his playbook. And she had a plan, a brilliant, audacious plan, that would turn his greatest, most cherished strength, his arrogance and perceived invincibility, into his biggest, most humiliating weakness. This was a political chess match, and Graham was about to be checkmated. The hearing had been proceeding with a deceptive calm for the first 2 hours. Graham, ever the seasoned performer, had questioned several witnesses about election security measures, mostly staying on script and carefully avoiding any major controversy. He was in his element, controlling the flow, dictating the terms. But the moment Jasmine Crockett was called to testify, a palpable shift occurred. The atmosphere in the room immediately, dramatically changed. A hush fell over the packed chamber. Crockett approached the witness table with a thick, well-worn folder of documents clutched in her hand, exuding a calm, unwavering confidence that impressed even her most cynical critics. She'd been invited to speak about the profound, often devastating impact of Texas's new voting laws on minority communities, a subject she knew intimately, better than almost anyone else in the entire country. "Thank you, Chairman Graham," she began, her voice clear, professional, and resonating with quiet authority. "I'm here today to discuss the real-world impact of SB 1, Texas's new election law, on voters in my district and across the state." Graham looked up from his papers, a flicker of what appeared to be mild, almost bored interest in his eyes. He'd heard these kinds of presentations countless times before, a monotonous parade of Democratic talking points, and he fully expected this to be just another routine session, easily dismissed. Crockett, however, began laying out her case with meticulous precision, methodically, devastatingly. She spoke of polling locations being abruptly moved without proper notice, of mail-in ballot applications being arbitrarily rejected for minor, insignificant technicalities, and of elderly, vulnerable voters being cruelly turned away for lacking proper, often impossible to obtain identification. Her presentation was not just detailed, it was fact-based, irrefutable, and utterly devastating in its implications, painting a grim picture of systemic disenfranchisement. But it was when she transitioned, her voice softening slightly, to speak about her own beloved grandmother's harrowing experience that Graham, in his arrogance, made his first fatal mistake. My grandmother, Sarah Williams, was born in 1925 in rural Missouri, Crockett said, her voice now carrying the immense weight of personal history, of generations of struggle. She lived through Jim Crow, through the indignity of poll taxes, and the blatant injustice of literacy tests. She used to tell me heartbreaking stories about walking miles, sometimes barefoot, just to vote, only to be cruelly turned away because she couldn't pay the tax or because the registrar, in his arbitrary power, decided her signature didn't match. Graham shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his impatience clearly visible, his face betraying his disdain for what he perceived as mere personal anecdotes, irrelevant to the serious business of policy. She lived to see the Voting Rights Act pass in 1965, Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength, a quiet defiance. She cried tears of joy when Barack Obama was elected president, a moment she thought signaled true progress. And she died in 2019, worried, deeply worried, that her great-granddaughter, me, might face the very same insidious barriers she fought her entire life to overcome. That's when Graham, in a moment of breathtaking hubris, made the sound that would forever haunt him, a sound that would echo in the annals of political infamy for months, perhaps years, to come. A soft, dismissive chuckle escaped his lips, followed by an exaggerated eye roll that the ever-present cameras caught with brutal, unforgiving clarity. He leaned over, conspiratorially, to whisper something to his staff, shaking his head with an air of superior amusement, as if he'd just heard the most ridiculous, most preposterous thing imaginable. The cameras caught it all, his smug, contemptuous expression, the arrogant eye roll, the condescending, mocking laugh that would soon become his catastrophic downfall. The sound, that infuriating, dismissive sound, echoed through the chamber, arrogant, dismissive, designed with surgical precision to diminish, to humiliate, to invalidate. It was the kind of laugh that screamed, "Sit down, little girl, the adults are talking. Your feelings, your history, your family's pain, none of it matters here." He had no idea, not the slightest inkling, that he had just made the biggest, most unforgivable mistake of his long, storied political career. If you're already feeling the tension, the righteous indignation, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. This, my friends, is just the beginning of the political firestorm, the prelude to a public execution. The reaction in the room was immediate, visceral, and electric. Civil rights activists in the audience gasped collectively, a wave of shock and outrage rippling through them. Reporters, sensing the seismic shift, started frantically typing on their phones, their fingers flying across keyboards, desperate to capture every detail of this unfolding drama. Crockett, with a composure that belied the fury simmering beneath the surface, paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing to slits as she processed the sheer audacity, the blatant disrespect, of what had just happened. Her gaze locked onto Graham, unwavering, piercing. "I'm sorry, Chairman Graham," she said, her voice still remarkably calm, but now laced with an unmistakable, razor-sharp edge that hadn't been there before, an edge that promised retribution. "Did you find something amusing about my grandmother's experience with voter suppression?" Graham looked up, seemingly caught off guard, genuinely surprised that he'd been called out so directly, so publicly. His smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "Representative Crockett," he stammered, attempting to regain control, his voice dripping with patronizing condescension, "I'm sure your grandmother was a lovely woman, but we're here to discuss facts and policy, not family stories." The condescension in his voice was not just unmistakable, it was a deliberate, calculated insult. Several Democratic committee members, their faces contorted with anger, started to object, their voices rising in protest, but Crockett, with a single, decisive gesture, held up her hand to stop them. She wanted to handle this herself. This was her moment. "Facts and policy," she repeated slowly, deliberately, her voice dripping with irony, as she opened her folder with a theatrical flourish. "You want facts and policy? Let me give you some facts, Chairman." Graham, still underestimating her, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, clearly amused by what he perceived as a young congresswoman getting emotional, losing her composure. He'd dealt with this kind of response countless times before and knew exactly how to exploit it to his advantage, to make her look weak. In Texas, Crockett continued, her voice rising slightly, gaining momentum, SB 1 has resulted in a 27% decrease in mail-in ballot applications in counties with large minority populations. That's not a family story, Chairman. That's cold, hard data from the Texas Secretary of State's office. She delivered the line like a prosecutor presenting irrefutable evidence. Graham, visibly annoyed by her persistence, waved his hand dismissively, a gesture of arrogant dismissal. Those numbers are misleading, Representative. People are simply following the new, more secure procedures. More secure? Crockett's voice carried a note of incredulity, of disbelief, laced with biting sarcasm. Chairman, are you familiar with the case of Mrs. Rosa Martinez, an 87-year-old voter in Houston who had her mail-in ballot rejected because her signature, affected by severe arthritis, didn't match the signature on file from when she registered to vote 30 years ago? I'm sure there were proper procedures, Graham started to say, attempting to interrupt, to deflect, but Crockett, with a sudden, uncharacteristic burst of defiance, cut him off. She's been voting in the same precinct for 4 decades, Crockett interrupted, something she almost never did, a clear sign of her growing fury. She's a retired teacher who served her community for 35 years. But according to your more secure procedures, her arthritis makes her vote fraudulent. Graham's smile was getting tighter, a strained, artificial grimace, but he stubbornly pressed on, clinging to his narrative. Representative, anecdotes don't make policy. We have to look at the broader picture. The broader picture? Crockett's voice, now a steel trap, resonated through the room as she abruptly stood up, a move highly unusual for a witness, signaling a dramatic shift in the power dynamic. Let me paint you the broader picture, Chairman Graham. She pulled out a large, professionally printed chart and held it up for the cameras, for the world to see, a visual indictment. This shows polling location changes in Texas since SB 1 was implemented. In majority-white counties, the average distance to a polling location increased by a mere 0.3 miles. But in majority-minority counties, Chairman, it increased by a staggering 2.7 miles. Graham glanced at the chart, but his expression remained unimpressed, dismissive. Transportation is easier now than it's ever been, Representative. That comment, delivered with such casual indifference, would prove to be his second major, unforgivable mistake, a statement so tone-deaf it bordered on offensive. Transportation is easier? Crockett's voice carried a note of profound disbelief, of utter exasperation. Chairman, are you familiar with the demographics of the communities we're talking about? 37% of households in my district don't own a car. The average hourly wage is $12.50. Taking time off work to travel an extra 5 miles round trip to vote could cost someone half a day's pay, a day's wages they can't afford to lose. Graham, in a final act of dismissive arrogance, shrugged. If voting is important to them, they'll find a way. The room erupted. Civil rights activists in the audience started shouting, their voices filled with righteous anger. Democratic committee members demanded order, their frustration boiling over. Even some Republicans, visibly uncomfortable with Graham's casual, callous dismissal of human struggle, shifted uneasily in their seats. But Crockett wasn't done. In fact, she was just getting started. If voting is important to them, she repeated, her voice now carrying the full, unyielding force of her courtroom training, every word a hammer blow. Chairman Graham, with all due respect, voting isn't something people should have to prove is important to them. It's a constitutional right, a sacred right, not a privilege to be earned through hardship. Graham, his face now a mask of dawning realization, understood he was rapidly losing control of the narrative, losing control of his own hearing. Representative, I think you're being a bit dramatic. Dramatic? Crockett's laugh was sharp, humorless, and filled with a cold, cutting irony. Chairman, let me tell you what's dramatic. What's dramatic is an 87-year-old woman crying in my office because she thinks she'll never be able to vote again. What's dramatic is college students being told their student IDs aren't acceptable identification to vote, but their gun licenses are. Graham's face was getting red now, a furious crimson, his composure cracking under the relentless assault. You're just being, I'm being what, Chairman? A woman? Young? Black? Which one of those things makes my facts less valid? And there it was. The mic drop. The moment that stopped the country, that echoed across every news channel and social media feed. The question that exposed everything, that laid bare the ugly truth of his condescension and bias. Graham realized he walked into a trap, a meticulously crafted snare, but it was too late to back out now. The escalation was complete. Graham had gone from confidently controlling the hearing to desperately being on the defensive, and everyone in the room, every single person, could feel the seismic shift in power. The experienced senator, the self-proclaimed master of political theater, was about to learn a brutal, unforgettable lesson. Underestimating Jasmine Crockett was a catastrophic mistake he'd regret for the rest of his career. What happened next will be remembered as one of the most devastating, brutal takedowns in congressional hearing history. Crockett pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first, overflowing with documents, and placed it deliberately, with a resonant thud, on the witness table. The sound of papers rustling was the only noise in the suddenly silent, captivated committee room. "Chairman Graham," she said, her voice now carrying the full, undeniable authority of someone who had spent years in courtrooms facing down hostile, aggressive opponents, "since you seem to find voting rights concerns amusing, let me share some information that might help you understand why this isn't funny to me or to millions of Americans." Graham shifted uncomfortably in his seat, squirming under her gaze. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold dread, and he was starting to realize, with sickening clarity, that he might have seriously, catastrophically miscalculated. If you're finding this story as shocking, as infuriating, as we are, hit that like button and subscribe for more unfiltered, raw political analysis. Don't miss the next bombshell. This is just the tip of the iceberg, the prelude to a much larger reckoning. In a matter of minutes, the internet exploded, a digital firestorm of outrage and vindication. The hashtag he got exposed was not just trending, it was dominating worldwide, a testament to the collective fury and the power of a single, devastating moment. Memes comparing Graham to a cartoon villain, a bumbling antagonist, flooded TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter, spreading like wildfire, mocking his arrogance and his ultimate humiliation. Even his staunchest allies at Fox News, usually masters of spin and deflection, found themselves scrambling, utterly unable to defend the indefensible, caught flat-footed by the sheer brutality of the takedown. The clip of Crockett's devastating question, her mic drop moment, was shared not just thousands, but millions of times across every single platform, reaching every corner of the globe. Political commentators, from across the ideological spectrum, called it a masterclass in how to handle a bully, a textbook example of turning the tables on an aggressor. Late-night talk show hosts had a field day, their monologues filled with scathing jokes and biting satire at Graham's expense. Saturday Night Live, ever quick to capitalize on viral moments, wrote an entire sketch around the moment, immortalizing Graham's condescending chuckle and Crockett's powerful retort. But it wasn't just the entertainment value, the sheer schadenfreude, that made this go so explosively viral. It was the raw, undeniable truth of the moment, the unvarnished reality that resonated with millions. Here was a young black woman, a relative newcomer, facing down one of the most powerful, entrenched men in the Senate, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to be intimidated, to be silenced. She didn't just defend herself, she didn't just hold her ground, she turned his condescension, his arrogance, into a weapon, a precision-guided missile aimed directly at his credibility. Twitter erupted with a torrent of reactions from politicians, celebrities, and ordinary Americans who had been waiting, yearning, for someone to say what Crockett had so bravely articulated. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a fellow progressive firebrand, tweeted, "This is what courage looks like. This is how you fight." Stacey Abrams, a titan in the voting rights movement, shared the clip with the powerful caption, "When preparation meets opportunity, justice prevails." Even some Republicans, in hushed, private conversations, were forced to admit that Graham had stepped in it, that he had fundamentally misjudged the situation and his opponent. The video was played on every major news network, dissected frame by frame. CNN called it a defining moment in the voting rights debate, a turning point. MSNBC ran a segment titled "How Jasmine Crockett Schooled Lindsey Graham," celebrating her intellectual and moral victory. Even Fox News, while desperately trying to defend Graham and spin the narrative, couldn't escape the obvious, the undeniable truth. Their guy had been caught being exactly what his critics had always said he was: arrogant, dismissive, and out of touch. The international media, recognizing the global significance of the moment, picked up the story with fervor. The BBC ran a detailed piece about the increasingly polarized nature of American political discourse. German newspapers wrote extensively about the young congresswoman who silenced a senator, highlighting the power of a single voice against entrenched power. The moment transcended mere American politics and became a universal symbol of standing up to power, of fighting for justice against overwhelming odds. Social media analytics showed that the clip was viewed over 50 million times in the first 48 hours alone, a staggering number. It became one of the most watched political moments of the year, rivaling presidential debate highlights and State of the Union addresses in its reach and impact. The online firestorm was relentless, with countless think pieces, analyses, and impassioned debates dissecting every second of the exchange, every nuance of Crockett's delivery. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a cultural phenomenon, a seismic event that forced a national conversation about power, privilege, systemic injustice, and the persistent, ongoing fight for voting rights. The internet was ablaze with discussions, debates, and fervent declarations of support for Crockett, turning her into an overnight sensation, a symbol of hope. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett for president and hashtag silence the smug were trending for days, becoming rallying cries for a new generation of activists. This was a moment that transcended politics, becoming a powerful symbol of resistance against arrogance, injustice, and the status quo. If you're still with us, still captivated by this unfolding drama, you know this is more than just a political spat. Share this video, spread the truth, and let's keep the conversation going. We're just getting started. The reverberations of this confrontation are still being felt across the political spectrum, reshaping the narrative around voting rights, accountability, and the very nature of political discourse. Don't miss out on the full story, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is history in the making. But let's be clear, this was never just about a petty fight between two politicians, a mere clash of personalities. It was about something far, far greater, the inherent fragility of entrenched power when it is finally, brutally confronted with unvarnished truth. Graham, in his monumental arrogance, made the classic, fatal mistake of profoundly underestimating his opponent, and he paid the ultimate price in real time, on a global stage. He genuinely believed he was dealing with just another House representative, a naive, easily intimidated newcomer who would crumble under the weight of his Senate authority and decades of experience. He had no idea, not the slightest inkling, that Crockett had been meticulously preparing for this exact, defining moment her entire, arduous career. As a former public defender and a relentless civil rights lawyer, she faced down hostile, biased judges, aggressive, unscrupulous prosecutors, and openly racist opponents in countless courtrooms. A condescending senator, no matter how powerful, was, for her, just another Tuesday, another obstacle to overcome. What made Crockett's response so utterly devastating wasn't just the precise, cutting words she chose, but the calm, unyielding authority with which she delivered them. She didn't lose her temper, she didn't resort to petty, personal attacks, she didn't descend to his level. Instead, with surgical precision, she simply held up a mirror, a brutal, unflinching reflection, and forced Graham to truly see, what everyone else in the room, and indeed, the entire world, was already witnessing: an old, privileged white man arrogantly dismissing a young, intelligent black woman's legitimate concerns about fundamental voting rights with a contemptuous, mocking laugh. The strategic brilliance, the sheer genius, of her question, "I'm being what, Chairman? A woman? Young? Black? Which one of those things makes my facts less valid?" was that it forced Graham into an impossible, inescapable position. He couldn't possibly answer without implicitly admitting that one or all of those characteristics were, in fact, influencing his biased, disrespectful treatment of her. His stunned, humiliated silence, his inability to respond, was far more damning, far more eloquent, than any answer he could have possibly conjured. This singular, explosive moment will undoubtedly define both of their careers, but in profoundly different, almost diametrically opposed ways. For Graham, it became an indelible symbol of everything fundamentally wrong with the old guard's outdated, arrogant approach to politics, a stark, humiliating reminder that the old ways of condescension, dismissal, and casual racism are no longer tolerated, no longer acceptable in a rapidly evolving society. His political capital took a massive, irreparable hit, and his carefully cultivated reputation as a shrewd, untouchable operator was severely, perhaps permanently, tarnished. For Crockett, however, it was a triumphant, career-defining moment that unequivocally established her as a formidable force to be reckoned with, someone who could not, be silenced or intimidated by traditional power structures, no matter how imposing. It cemented her status as a rising star, a true firebrand, in the progressive movement and a fearless, unwavering advocate for justice, equality, and the rights of the marginalized. This wasn't just a victory for Crockett, it was a resounding victory for every marginalized voice that has ever been dismissed, ignored, or silenced. It powerfully demonstrated that authenticity, meticulous preparation, and unwavering courage can, indeed, dismantle even the most deeply entrenched, seemingly impregnable power dynamics. The long-term consequences for Graham's career are still unfolding, a slow, painful decline, but for Crockett, this moment was a powerful launchpad, propelling her into the national spotlight and solidifying her role as a champion for voting rights, a true voice for the voiceless. This confrontation, raw and unfiltered, exposed the deep-seated, uncomfortable issues of race and gender that still plague American politics, making it a pivotal, watershed moment in the ongoing, arduous struggle for equality and social justice. It highlighted the urgent, desperate need for a more inclusive, more equitable, and more respectful political discourse, where facts, empathy, and lived experiences are valued above dismissive arrogance and cynical power plays. If you're learning something new, if this story is resonating with you, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. We want to hear your take. What do you think this means for the future of political debates and the fight for true representation? Your voice matters. What we witnessed today wasn't just a heated debate about voting rights, it was a masterclass in how truth, when delivered with unwavering courage and surgical precision, becomes the most powerful, most destructive weapon of all. Graham's initial, arrogant chuckle was meant to diminish, to humiliate, to silence, but it backfired spectacularly, an epic self-own. Instead of silencing Crockett, it inadvertently gave her the perfect opening, the precise moment she needed, to expose the deep-seated condescension, the blatant bias, and the systemic injustices that too often go unchallenged, unpunished, in the hallowed halls of power. This unforgettable moment serves as a stark, urgent reminder that real, transformative change doesn't always emanate from complex legislation or meticulously crafted policy papers. Sometimes, it comes from someone brave enough, someone audacious enough, to ask the right question at the right time, to speak truth to power, regardless of the personal cost. Crockett didn't just defend her beloved grandmother's memory, she fiercely defended the inherent dignity, the fundamental rights, of every single person who has ever been dismissed, ignored, or marginalized because of who they are, rather than what they have to say. Her performance, a blend of intellect, passion, and unwavering resolve, was a beacon of hope for those who feel unheard, a powerful testament to the enduring power of speaking truth to power, even when the odds are stacked against you. It was a clear, unambiguous message, a thunderclap, to the old guard: your outdated tactics of intimidation, your dismissive arrogance, your casual racism, will no longer work. The political landscape is irrevocably changing, and new, powerful voices are rising, armed not with privilege, but with facts, with courage, and with an unwavering, unshakable commitment to justice and equality. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a movement, a catalyst for change. It sparked a renewed sense of urgency in the ongoing fight for voting rights and inspired countless individuals, from all walks of life, to speak up, to stand up, against injustice, against oppression. So what do you think? Did Graham get what he truly deserved? Was Crockett's response the perfect, brutal takedown, a moment of pure poetic justice, or did she, perhaps, go too far? Drop your honest thoughts, your impassioned opinions, in the comments below. And if you want to keep seeing these explosive moments, these crucial instances when power gets confronted with raw, undeniable truth, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because in a world where far too many people in power arrogantly believe they're untouchable, we need to be ready, we need to be vigilant, to witness every single moment when someone, a true hero, proves them wrong. Don't miss out on the next bombshell, the next revelation. Subscribe now. And remember, your voice matters. Let it be heard, loud and clear. The fight for justice continues, relentlessly, and we'll be here to cover every single, pivotal moment. Join our community, become part of the conversation, and help us amplify the voices that need to be heard. Together, we can make a difference. This is more than just news, this is a revolution in the making.